everybody, it's Norm here along with
Kate.
And we are back with another episode of Model Behavior. Today we're going to do something that I think all of us in model making have thought about and maybe it's scary to get into.
It is.
We're going to be painting tiny heads. Tiny heads. I've never done this before.
You know, it was something that I think I've avoided a long time because it just feels so detailed. It can be daunting.
Yeah, it's something that I think anytime you get a model kit where there is a tiny figure that goes along with it, like the clothes, you can mask and do a wash, but the faces, there's a precision to it that I feel like you need practice to do. And very oftentimes, I don't want to ruin the kit I've gotten.
Right?
So one idea that we had was, well, in order to practice and experiment with painting heads, maybe we should just have a bunch of heads so we don't feel like we're going to be ruining anything.
Right, yeah, let's give ourselves some room for mistakes, and not necessarily mistakes, but maybe just like, oh, okay, then next time I'll do this a little different, tweaking your technique.
Yes, so today we have, these are just casts of these Hot Toys heads, 1/6 scale. So really good size. If you watch their YouTube videos or there are galleries of people who paint these as like the only thing they do and are incredibly talented, but we're gonna try to emulate some of those techniques here. Threw these heads into a dump mold that Bill Duran helped us make, and then just cast them up with some smooth cast, 326. Each of us will have 4 or 5 heads to work with. You picked out Jeff Bridges.
I'm a sucker for Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges, Ironmonger from Iron Man 1. And I think this is Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark from, I think it might be Avengers. They're Hot Toys. Making the molds, you can see that there's a little bit of maybe a little bit of silicone in there, but they're not going to ruin the head. So if you have a Hot Toys figure, you could totally throw this in some silicone, cast it up, and use as a way to experiment with painting.
Something to be mindful of is, as you can see, the difference between our castings. So your Robert Downey Jr. head has a very pronounced neck, which means your casting has a defined neck, whereas my Jeff Bridges is just the head, so we end up with a bit more slack down here. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, when you're making the mold, you can just throw some clay underneath it and make a neck, basically. Just a way to have something for that. And also, we didn't put this in a pressure pot, so we got holes, we got bubbles. We're okay with that. The idea is not to be precious with these. It's so that we can just get through the hump of trying painting heads for the first time.
Exactly. If you're really worried about it, you can go through with some spot putty or any kind of filler that you want. But again, this is more about the painting process than about the casting process.
Well, let's talk about the paint then.
Okay.
What's the paint you've picked out for us to work with?
So I am going with some Tamiya lacquer paint. It sort of ensures that should we ever want to put a wash on it or anything like that, it's going to be much more durable. It's not going to break down like a water-based paint. And, it can be handled a bit more and still be sturdy. So, and this allows us to do some airbrushing and some hand brushing. It's really versatile.
The model paints that we have, we have a variety of colors and things. What are these? This is like a light sand. I don't know if we actually have any straight up flesh tone. It's like a brown. So we're going to need to mix.
Yeah. And what's great is that as you study whichever figure you have or whatever it is that you want to do, you'll notice there are variations in skin tones. So I had thought, oh, well, maybe I can do, just straight out of the bottle. And as you do it, you start to notice, oh, I could use a little more pink in it or a little more yellow in it. And so just, get in with mixing, see what you can come up with.
Yeah, your skin tone, everyone's a little different, but definitely has a little bit of yellow or green in it. The thing that blows me away, and I don't know if we'll ever get to this, is that if you look at the Hot Toy figures, like the coloring on the skin, it's not flat at all.
No.
There's depth to it. There's pores that they paint on,
and
even like shading for.
Yeah, almost like blotchiness underneath, which is totally authentic. That's how skin looks.
I wonder. I'm curious what they start off, or is it? I think it might be cast in like a base skin color, a flesh tone color. For us, we cast in some clear, and it's gray primer. So that's what we're starting off with.
And, this is totally, I always just go straight to gray primer. But if you want to make it easier on yourself, you can go with a white primer or anything else. You will notice as you start to put your base on just how much coverage you're going to.
Or even you can tint your resin
Yeah.
and go with something with a little more translucence.
Exactly.
Oftentimes you'll buy a kit and it's more translucent. Opaque is, we're giving us the heart, it's like G.I. Joes. That's what we're basically painting up, flat gray G.I. Joes. So you got an airbrush. I have some hand brushes. I'm not ready to start an airbrush yet, so maybe a good way to start is we can mix up some paints and show the difference between airbrushing and hand brushing. What would your first step be?
My first step is going to be, especially because of how much skin Jeff Bridges has showing here with his bald head, I'm going to go straight for flesh tone. So I'm going to build up as much as I can of an opaque base. And even from there, if I want to add different skin tones on top of that, but my first step, I'm just going to try and get it all in. And I'm not going to worry too much about his beard or his eyeballs. Yes, these things will be a different color eventually, but right now, just getting my base in.
All right, same thing. I'm going to mix up something that I think approximates this flesh tone and just paint it on, get some coverage, and we'll go from there. So as I'm mixing this, I started off with I'll start with a medium color, a brown. And then I added some of this sand color and deck tan, a little bit of red. And I quickly realized it was getting way too dark.
Yes.
And I need to pull that back, so maybe I shouldn't have started off with a dark color.
Right, there's a rule in painting that it is much easier to make something darker than it is to make it lighter. So always starting with your lightest base coat and then darkening from there. So a quick fix for something like this, so you have quite a bit mixed up already. My advice would be to take a new cup.
Okay.
And I would say put a little bit of that color in with more white in it. And that way you're starting afresh. You don't have to try and color because it's a numbers game. The more white you add to this, you're going to have much, much more paint at this point.
Right.
So you are just going to start over, take a little bit of that, and start lightening it.
All right. This is a don't be afraid to make mistakes project. Mistakes are the name of the game.
Happy little accidents.
Yes.
Sometimes it's better to have those mistakes happen because then it just teaches you, all right, I'm not going to do it like that again.
Okay, something I'm quickly realizing with the hand painting is that it's a little uneven, like we've demonstrated in the past between rattle can and hand brushing. It's tough to make it with hand brushing really even, so I gotta be either really patient with it and go real thin layers or switch over to an airbrush, which I'm definitely gonna do for my second one and the ones going forward. While I'm waiting for this to dry before I add on another coat, I'm going to evaluate, do I want to maybe change the color a little bit? Maybe at this point put a little more red in, a little more yellow in, but I also mix up the color for the hair because I can also tackle that right now, so that's what I'm going to do.
I've got my base coat in. I'm going to start playing with some hand painting, maybe put his white eyeballs in. See what that looks like.
Did you mix any gray into his hair?
Yes. A little, I started with like a brown, and then I added the gray to that. And then I had to go over with a white at the end for the dusting of salt and pepper that he has.
Wow, it's gray. More brown.
Now, for anybody who struggles with doing fine detail painting and having your hands shake, that's very common. Like, it happens to me and I work in miniatures. One of the tricks to help you with that is to find a way to steady yourself. You always want to find something to lean on. So even in this situation where I'm craning my hand around to get in a certain angle, I am leaning at least the base of my palm on this bottle so that as I go to balance my brush, it is much more stable here. I'm not getting hardly any shakes.
Very surprising. One of the things I'm learning right now is when I first put on the hair color, I'm not happy with it at all. I'm like, this looks not right. But then as I do full coverage, it looks closer. It's not perfect. It's not there yet, but it's totally a contrast. It's starting to look like a real person. I like to think of this as like the alien life form that's trying to be human and imitate human. That's what all this work is. We're just trying to make these things look human. What does a human look like? What does skin look like?
Okay, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of color to maybe do some lips with. But the brush that I'm painting with is so small that first, scooping out as much paint as I need and putting it on a palette and then mixing it all up, it's just not the kind of work you want to do with something this small. So a lot of times if I'm mixing a color, I will take a slightly bigger brush and I will do something like grab a big glob of it, put it down on my palette, and then try not to contaminate the other color. Get a little bit of that one, put it down, and then mix it all in here until you get the color you like. And then, of course, because I like to do good practices, immediately rinse this out, leave that in your lacquer thinner, and then take your small brush, dip it in, and paint away.
So as I'm starting to put some of this hair color on, it's hilarious because one of the things I've realized is by not using by hand brushing and not using the airbrush to put my base color on, there's too much paint that I'm putting on. I'm brushing through some of these layers, and so it's actually covering over a lot of the surface detail. If you see on the Hot Toys, the original, where the hair is, the eyebrows, the beard, like that facial hair, all has sculptural detail in there, which would make it easier to bring that out. All that sculptural detail's gone because I've basically hand brushed over everything. And so what I'm left with is basically, it looks like fake hair.
You mentioned this before, but you start to notice that, you know, originally if you thought, oh, the skin color wasn't the right thing, and then you add the hair, and suddenly the two together make them look a little better.
Yeah.
So one of the things to keep in mind is like, yeah, this one component might not look right, but it's all by itself. Mm-hmm. As you keep adding to it, it's going to start to look a lot more normal.
And for me, it's not about making it look exactly like the Hot Toys original. Like, I'm not going to do that with the skills I have here. To me, it's looks like it's a passable 6th scale head.
Representation.
Yes, like if someone looks at this and like, oh, okay, that's a head, has all the features.
Yep.
And it doesn't look like it was their first try. I'm going to go with the 4th try. You know, once you add the pupils in, then it's like, okay, yeah, that's a person, that's a face. That's a face, that's a life model decoy, an LMD in MCU parlance. Okay, so about an hour has passed,
Yep.
An hour working on our first ones, and let's take a look at what happened. So I'm going to show mine off first because it's the crummier one, and I feel like this is like a failed painting restoration. It's okay because we have plenty more heads to work with. Things I learned, definitely want to go airbrush for that base coat first. Hand brushing, especially, not so easy when the primer is dark.
Yes.
Because it's always easier to darken than to lighten, as we've now learned. Not too unhappy with hair and color, but opportunities for maybe layering.
Yeah, I do like your hair, actually. It looks pretty good. I think that if you, tried adding like a few little, almost like highlights.
Right, exactly. Something, take the color I've made for the hair, lighten or darken, and then just like almost just dry brush a little bit on top. That's what I'll try next time. And I didn't even really worry too much. I just wanted to get eyeballs on there, but like just practice. That's good practice with using a very tiny brush.
Definitely.
Let's look at yours.
Okay, something I want to say, my thoughts and takeaway. You can see the dark gray coming through his skin. I feel like there's this like dullness underneath the base skin coat. So I think in the next one I might want to do a white primer first.
Okay.
Just to give me more of a glow underneath. I think I could do some more, definitely with, this is just the color I mixed up for the skin. I could try adding some more colors, you know, to give it the readiness almost. I don't have the eyes right yet. I haven't done any shading in like, you know, creases. So there's a lot I can work on.
I like the beard because the beard is two-tone.
Yeah, and actually that is just 2 colors too. I didn't mix anything. I just did the darker brown as the base because you can see some of that in his beard here. And then I brushed the gray on top. I might tweak some of the colors, but we'll see. I mean, I feel like that one's pretty close.
I feel like once you get that skin tone right into the airbrush, that's like 50% of it right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so without further ado, let's take our second heads. You're gonna respray that.
Yep.
Get a light primer. I'm gonna mix up some of this for a new skin tone and then airbrush it on, and we'll get started. I've mixed up another batch of the skin tone,
Yes.
which I think is gonna be better than the first one. I wanna airbrush that on, but I need to, he said, to thin it out.
Yes, the lacquer as it is a little bit thicker, so it doesn't like to go through the airbrush as easily. So while it's good for painting on, you know, the thinned out stuff can be a little too watery, you're gonna have to mix in some lacquer thinner. Now the trick usually is, I tend to do it by eye, but you want it to look like the consistency of milk.
Okay.
So a good tip is, if you're gonna plan on having to do touch-ups, hold back a little bit of your paint so that after you spray it, if you need to do it by brush, you have something thicker.
So I'm not gonna put the thinner directly in here.
Yeah.
I'm going to pour a little bit in here.
Yep.
All right.
That should be fine.
I have plenty here for touch-ups.
And
And
again, I
then-
tend to eyeball it, so looking at however much we have in there, whoop, let's try that.
It's like a 50-50 mix right now. So you're looking at how runny it is, how much is sticking to
Yeah.
the walls.
To me, that feels a bit like milk. It's pretty thin, but it's leaving a bit of a consistency on the edges. You can tell that there's like a bit of a thickness to it. If you find that it's just too thin, you can always add some more paint.
Great.
All
All
right.
right, 50-50 mix, and then I can pour this directly into the airbrush,
Yes.
and then we'll get this coat on. Sweet. Okay, attempt number 2.
Yes.
Let's take a look. Why don't we start with yours first?
Okay. So you can see, first I went through and I lightened the base so it had a white primer underneath. And I think that there's a noticeable difference with that glowing through underneath. Secondly, I changed my skin tone to be a bit more red because I noticed that the original had some red in it. Then in the beard, I added a little bit of a lighter brown as well, and I worked a little bit more on my detail in the pupils. But there's still some work to be done. I think I'd like to add even more colors into the skin tone. I'd like to spend some time trying to do shading on the skin, and the eyes still could be better.
Yeah. I did, finally, an airbrush on mine, and I think it's a world of a difference. And also not just the evenness of it, but also just how shiny it is. It's much more matte
Definitely.
with the airbrush, which I like. And like yours, this is just one coat right now for the skin tones. I think you're right that we need to start thinking about the many different layers
Sure.
of skin. And then also, not only the color for that, because I think I could actually add more red to mine while you yellow, a little bit yellow.
Yeah, a little more
down.
yellow, a little more brown.
Like where those pockets are.
Yes.
Right? Because if you look at the original ones, like there is definitely shading in there. And there's
Totally.
a focus of places that goes dark.
It is not uniform.
Yeah, something that I noticed in the second attempt in doing the facial hair is I'm not getting as much of the relief of the the facial hair. And I don't know if that's because the sculptural detail is gone from the mold and cast, or because I want to find maybe more translucent paint for that. Not sure, but it definitely is good practice, and I think that means we're going to move over to our third attempt.
Now, before I spray it, I have sprayed this white with primer, and I've actually let it sit overnight. I had some issues. You can see here that I used a gray primer, and then I think too soon, while it was still tacky, I put the lacquer on top. And enamel and lacquer do not mix well, especially if it's not fully cured. And you can see a bit of the cracking coming through here. So, you know, if ever in doubt, just give it as much time as possible. All right, I'm about to start my third head, but I wasn't quite happy with the colors I was getting. I felt like the first one was too dark, the second one was too red. So what I've done here is I've gone with the same colors as before, my wooden deck tan, a little dull red, a little brown, and a little of the linoleum brown. But I added a whole bunch of the light sand to give it more of a yellow tone, and I think that's really gonna help. So I'm gonna see how that looks. Now, something to remember is when you're dealing with something this small that has a lot of detail like his beard, you don't want to pile in too much paint because that's going to start to clog up in between all the fine details. So if you find yourself having to do multiple layers on something, you want to make sure your brush is like pretty dry. It's almost like a dry brush, but not too clogged. And as you start to brush it on, almost use the brush to move that paint around. Make sure that you're pushing into all of those detailed sections so that it doesn't just pool in the crevices, but like it's spread out.
It's almost there. One more coat, I think?
Yeah, I say around his forehead seems the lightest, so try going heavy on that.
So, Kate, what are you doing over there? You notice you're touching up the skin, but with a brush.
Yes, what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of this darker color, this is just a straight brown, and I'm dipping my teeny tiny brush in it, and I'm sort of wiping it off so that it acts more like a dry brushing. And I'm going into these little crevices here, anywhere there's a fold, and I'm just very lightly touching it. Like I almost don't want to see too much paint come off, but just enough where it accentuates all these great details, because he has some really, really fantastic facial expressions that have been sculpted into here, and I just want to bring them out.
And this is something that it's maybe a little even too fine to do with an airbrush to get.
Yeah, exactly. The details are so small that there is a technique you could do this with your airbrush, but I'm kind of experimenting right now to see how much I can do with just a paintbrush.
I'm gonna do the same.
So this is the pink that I had mixed up to spray a few little highlights on his head. And what we did is we kept this in a cup to the side, and now we're using it for things like his lips, maybe a little bit of details around his eyes, but it's a good way to be efficient with your use of color.
Round 3 is complete, and I think we're both much happier with our results.
Much happier.
Let's talk about Ironmonger over there first.
Okay, so this one I did a base coat of my skin tone. I went back through, I added a little bit of brown with the airbrush and then a bit of red all over. I came in with my dry brushing and just added like a little bit of shadows into the sculptural highlights. I added some darkening in his nostrils and his ears, and I'm really happy with it.
That's awesome.
I added more pink around the eyeball too, so like in the soft tissue areas.
I think the improvements on the skin tones are what we're getting over time here, and that's exactly what I'm seeing here. This the difference between my stage 2 and my stage 3, tremendous, because one, I start off like, followed your lead and start off with a white primer as opposed to the gray primer. So I'm darkening as opposed to lightening. And immediately, using the exact same flesh tone that I mixed up, it looks less gray. Like you can tell, my stage 2, it's almost like a zombie-ish in that
Totally.
gray. So laid that on, and then already it looked fleshy, but then compared to the original, not dark enough.
Right.
So I took a 3-prong approach to the skin tone this time. Airbrushed in, then like you, darken with the hand brush around certain areas to bring out the sculptural detail. That's the ridges in the cheeks, under the nostrils, behind the ears, a little bit of the beard area. And then I took that same color that you mixed up for the lips and the red that you had put in and just spritzed it around in the ears and around the eyes. And it's almost like applying makeup.
Totally.
Which makes sense.
Right. I started to worry when I was adding some pink to his cheeks. I was like, oh, it looks like blush. But at the same time, blush is something people put on to mimic a natural fleshing. And if you don't add it at all, it just looks so flat and monotone.
Yeah.
But bringing out those different spots, you know?
Right. The thing with the eyes you mentioned, the pink areas around the eyes, that actually helped me be less worried about the whites of the eyes.
Right.
Because I was applying the whites of the eyes, and it's always like, you gotta paint it within the lines, let that white pool up. Oh no, it's going too far. But I can always cover and fix that with some of the pink and letting the pink really get into the inner eye and the inside of the eye and the outside of the eye. And yeah, I'm really, really happy with step 2 and 3. The other thing is that there are only like 3 colors here.
Right.
It's like the skin tone, version of the hair brown, and then the pink, which you use for the lips and the airbrush. So worry less about mixing up, 10 different types of colors and think about how they actually layer on top. What do you think you'll do for the 4th one?
I think for the 4th one, I'm going to do an experiment now where instead of doing a base of the skin tone and then adding things on top of it, I'm going to see what happens if I maybe put some colors underneath it that show through.
Oh, okay. One question I have is, do you have any recommendations for how I can make the hair? Like painting on the mustache, the thing that's been consistent is that it's opaque, it's kind of tough, it just looks like a stick-on mustache.
Right.
How do I have that blend a little bit better?
Honestly, I'd say it would be worth experimenting with the airbrush. Let's see if you can get a really fine, stream coming out. And maybe what the thing is that you do that and then go back through with the flesh and fill in any areas where you get overspray. I mean, it's worth a shot.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, totally worth a shot. And even if this ends up being the best one I make for this video, I'm pretty happy. Big improvements.
If you play with the gun a little bit, you'll get it so fine if you can find the sweet spot in the trigger that I was able to even do like his sideburns and up over his mustache. So like if you find the sweet spot, you might be able to really limit where you're spraying.
I'm trying to create places where I can blend then, and then when I paint eyebrows or paint the fish art, then I can be a little more dry brushy about it, as opposed to having to draw the lines.
You've got your foundation in there. If you're worried about too much, like if you've got one thing exactly how you like it and you don't want to accidentally airbrush over it, you can see here That's what this is where I
Masking,
started
yeah.
to just like hold it up and spray.
Right. Keep on moving with the airbrush.
Yep.
Always be moving.
Don't let it pool.
Time's up. And I say time's up because we could do this for hours and hours and days.
Oh, definitely. I found myself getting lost in it, going, no, just one more pass. You got to call it.
But we have finished 4 heads, and I think the improvement is there.
Yeah, you can definitely see the progression, and you can see where we experimented with some things didn't work, and there are a few constants where you found something that worked and you just wanted to keep doing it.
Exactly. For the final head, both of us did some undertones.
Yeah.
Darker red, browns, and then put on some of the skin. And then I did a little makeup, right?
Yeah.
And I freaked out at one point because I said, oh shoot, I say a splotch of red in the cheek.
Right.
And you told me, don't worry, because I can just go back, and you can go back and forth and back and forth. And at the end, it actually creates a layered look.
Definitely. Some of the things you noticed from the original, the thing we were using as our master, there were these tones that you couldn't tell how they got them. It was like subtle variations, and I think that's what it is you layer that stuff underneath in what looks like, a hectic pattern, and then when you cover it over with your final tone, it really blends it out.
Yeah, there's a little bit of randomness, but also awareness of like where darker areas on a person's head would be,
Right.
close to the hairline, between the bridge of your nose, like that kind of stuff. And also trying our best to accentuate the sculptural details of these. Also, the other thing I did was I airbrushed a lot of the hair on ahead of time, and also we thinned out some of that color that I used for the hair, and I think that really helped blend it with the skin and made it look less opaque. Just a little more of that translucent facial hair. The beard, I love the way you did the beard there. Are you happy with this?
I am. I really enjoyed getting to play around with the different techniques and coming to discover what worked best, because I haven't done a whole lot of figure painting either. So this was truly an experiment for both of us.
Yeah, and hope you had fun watching, and hope you take advantage and try to paint your own figureheads. It never hurts to throw them in a dump mold, cast up a bunch, and practice. And love to see what you do out there, whether it's your first figurehead painting or your 4th one or your 10th one, or whether you've been doing it for years. This is a lot of fun. We'll have more projects in the future. Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you all out there for watching. We'll see you next time.